welcome to this session looking at liability. We've just been talking about what we're going to call these sessions going forward, and Andrew very cleverly came up with the DOM discussion, and Alistair and Gordon said tag talks. So we're not quite sure yet, but welcome. It's great to have you here. This session is just going to look at legal aspects, policy aspects, and liability aspects as we all start to work again. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the team that are assembled here. Gordon Kerr, our strategic consultant for legal services, Martina Scharwey, our strategic consultant for quality, Andrew Scott, who's one of our board members and past president from Dwellworks, and Alistair Murray, who's a board member from RSS. So I'm just going to give you a brief indication of how this came about. Every week we have a board huddle, and the board talk about all sorts of things, which is fantastic at the moment because obviously there's so much going on. And Alistair and Andrew, you both brought up some concerns, I suppose, that you had about how we move forward as we open up, but particularly what liabilities destination service providers are under as we go forward working with the environment of COVID-19. So, Alistair, do you want to just outline what it was that you talked about in that huddle?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I think it's the rate of change at the moment is incredible, and how things are evolving over the weeks and days recently is sometimes difficult to keep up with. And how we were talking at our board huddle was similar to the conversation we had about 2 months ago, roughly, when in the UK restrictions started to come into place, and we were being asked by clients and assignees whether we were able to do certain things like be present at a check-in, for example. And it was open to interpretation 2 months ago, roughly. And then for sort of an 8-week period during lockdown, there wasn't a great deal we could do. There was still lots of activity, but it didn't involve any sort of person-to-person contact. And now, as restrictions are being lifted, there's that interpretation of government guidance again. So, again, particularly in the UK, and I'm conscious of not making this completely UK-centric, but just from our experience, just about 2 weeks ago, just under 2 weeks ago, the government published guidelines of the property market opening up. And so immediately, assignees were emailing and on the phone and asking if they can go and view properties. And it was up to us to begin with to interpret government guidance in the best way possible. And I think the phrase health and safety has never had such incredible significance at the moment, and that's forefront of everyone's mind. So we're trying to be cautious as well as trying to be as helpful and positive as possible. So there's just a grey area at the moment, and this was again 2 weeks ago, and lots has changed since then. So we're trying to come up with a consistent way of working, but those issues of us being at the forefront of advising people what to do for the best, because risk is so heightened at the moment, it did create a lot of conversation and concern for all DSPs at the moment. So that's where the conversation started, and I think Andrew agreed with the position we're facing in the UK.
Yeah, Andrew, can you just outline the thoughts that you had initially when we were starting to discuss this?
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with Alistair, and I always tend to, actually, which is a good thing. But we were also looking at it, from a number of obviously countries that we operate in. Is there, a way of having some kind of standard protocol that we could be saying to, customers and obviously across the industry as far as EuRA is concerned? Is there a kind of a message that, as there is concern around potential liability, that as things open up in each country in a slightly different way, whilst the core of what we do remains the same, are there some, I'm saying guidelines, I mean them in the loosest term, but at least a protocol that we could come up with that is relevant for us, as an industry, as in, destination service providers. There are some relatively basic things that we think are absolute givens that everybody should be doing. But is there something else that we could construct so that we can be saying to customers, as an industry, we are all aware of what obligations, implications are, and we think this is perhaps the best way forward in terms of as things start to open up and people are getting back to business, which will be in different guises to a certain extent in different countries, but the core of what we all do is the same. And as that discussion kind of developed, we did get onto the point that Alistair's very coherently made, because there's so much kind of talk and concern around health and safety, as there always has, but even more so now, and particularly maybe even with the individuals and families that are actually receiving the service, possibly face to face, even if it's in virtually. What would our obligations and liabilities be if we're introducing them to agents, landlords, etc.?
Yeah, that's absolutely. And I mean, Martina, we're going to talk about that in a minute, because Martina has brilliantly put together a policy for EuRA members to be able to implement, like you say, Andrew, a kind of across the board. This is best practice in terms of what we should all be doing. But Gordon, you and I spoke yesterday and a couple of days before that on the original sort of major concern over, is there liability if, for example, you are working with a client and that client then contracts COVID-19? Can you outline what we spoke about?
Yeah, and to go back to legal basics, for a business to have liability, really two things have to occur. There has to be what we call a causal link. It must be provable that you caused, in this case, the infection. And secondly, it has to be shown that you acted negligently, you acted recklessly. And so if we take the first point about causation, it's why we expect to see lots of claims against, let's say, care homeowners, cruise line owners, because they individuals who have contracted the disease are able then to say, we were in that location for 2 weeks, we were trapped on the cruise ship, we were in a care home, and therefore we can show that that's how it was caused. Whereas in the context of the relocation business, when we're thinking about home search or orientation, I don't think that causal link can be shown, because that individual will have visited other shops or whatever, they've been out and about, they've not been trapped for 2 weeks with a home search consultant, clearly. So that's the first point. And in a sense, you could say, well, that ends the discussion. But if you're a relocation business, you don't want to be able to say, well, technically you can't sue me, because after all, you're probably going to lose the client and your reputation is going to be damaged. So actually, it's the second aspect that's more important, which is this question of, you've not acted negligently, you've actually taken all reasonable steps to put in a safe system of work that protects your employees, that protects your clients, protects your contractors. And that's why it ties in so neatly with what Martina is doing just now, and the new policy and the illustrations in the policy. That is perfect for a business being able to say, well, we followed the EuRA guidelines, we did everything possible, and therefore there can be no claim against us. Just one other thing to mention up front, where I do think companies have to be careful about claims. It's less about customers, more about employees. So we will see employment law claims coming up in all countries. And the classic situation will be, you put in a system that you believe is compliant with all health and safety requirements, and an employee says, no, I'm not comfortable about this, I'm not happy about coming back to the office. If ultimately that employee is dismissed, they would then bring a claim for unfair dismissal. And so we will see situations like that in across the board, whether it's the construction industry, shops reopening, and there are bound to be difficult situations in relocation businesses as well. So that's how I would sum it up. Very little concern about customer claims, little bit more concern about employee claims, but again, following the COVID-19 policy that has been put together by Martina, I think actually addresses these issues very neatly.
Yes, it does. And it's a bit like, Gordon, you've just updated our GDPR policy. And, again, the tremendous fear at the beginning of GDPR was everybody was going to be sued for everything because it seemed like this open-ended thing. But as you just said, if you are adhering to a policy and as an organization you can say we're working to best practice, then it's much more, it's much easier for you as an organization to say we've done everything we can and therefore our liability is limited. Martina, thank you so much for getting that policy drafted and out to the members so quickly. Again, you wrote that in very much as Gordon was saying, in terms of both liability to employee and liability to client. Can you run through some of the highlights for me?
Yeah, I think the most important point is that, of course, you have to look very, very closely to the local requirements of your country where you're doing business in, because they are so different from country to country. And sometimes within one country, you have different regulations as well. I think in the UK, it's a case. In Germany, it's a case. I don't know about the other countries, but probably it's the same. So, and they change on a really regular basis. Right now, we are more like in a weekly period that regulations are changing. So the most important point is you have to be up to date with all those regulations. But this is a legal point. And as Gordon said before, it is so important to keep your employees safe, that you offer a safe workplace, and that your intention has to be to keep your customers and clients safe, whatever is going on in the next couple of weeks. And if you're talking about the next couple of months, business will go back not to normal, but you have to do business in a face-to-face version with customers, with clients, with their families. And so it's so important to implement precaution measurements in order to be on the top of what is possible, not probably only to fulfill your local requirements, but to be and to provide best practice in health care and in health and safety solutions. So the two policies are, I put together as an example. The first one is for employees, partners, and subcontractors. And here it is very important to inform, to train them as well, because they have to know what to do. For example, that they're not allowed to step in your office without an appointment. It's important to make sure that everyone who's coming into your appointment, if that is a necessary meeting, that they have an appointment, that you know how many people coming in, for example, that you know who is coming in, so that you have like a tracking system, for example, that you know the name or the phone number, that you make sure that your office space is clean as far as possible, so that you have meeting rules, for example, very easy stuff to keep distance, that you not put too many visitors and employees and staff into one room, that you make sure that there is a maximum number of people in one room if it is necessary at all, that you provide like face masks, that you inform everyone that they have to wear a face and mouth mask before entering the office and going to the meeting, that you offer disinfection lotion and so on, that your bathroom is clean. So this is the stuff you can do on the organization and administrative side. Additionally, you have to look what you're doing with your clients. I mean, in one point in the near future, customers and clients and transferees will come in by plane, by train, by car, whatever. What are you doing with them? Someone has to take care of them. I mean, this is part of your services you sell and you deliver to your customers and clients, like home search, like, you know, showing people around, explaining, making appointments with schools, and all the regular stuff you did in the past. And therefore it is necessary to inform your transferees, so customers and clients, before they are coming in. So what is prevention they could do? For example, please, if you're coming in by airplane, whatever is the regulation in the country where you're coming from, whatever the regulations of the, you know, airline are, if you're coming in, please wear a hand and face mask. Everyone in the family who's coming in, before you meet with your destination provider, with a consultant. If you know, picked up your luggage, please go to, you know, to the restroom, wash your hands, and then coming out with a mask, and we will take care of you. We have to know who's coming, how many people, and so on. So we will provide a proper car. You are just allowed to sit in the back, not next to the driver, who is your consultant. So we have to know how many people coming in, how many child seats, and so on. And probably we have to hire another car, a bigger car, you know, a 6-seater or whatever, so that everyone can sit in the back. But you have to inform customers and clients up front. So I put a policy together that you can provide them, the employees as well, and then one for the customers and clients. For your employees, it's important that they know, and you can train them, and your consultants, of course, what they have to do and what kind of rules they have to follow. Again, you have the country-specific rules, but in addition, you should have your company-specific rules, and your employees, your staff, your consultants working for your company. So it's up to you to come up with these policies, adapt them to your, you know, requirements, what you think it is important. But one thing is, they have to know it, they have to follow your policies and your rules you came up with. And that is important. I mean, for example, they use a company car. Make sure that you have additional gloves, for example, to refill the car. So don't use the hands, have enough spare masks in the car, have spare sanitizer lotion in the car, make sure they clean the car if they leave the car, or if they clean the car before they enter the car, for example. So some practices should be routine in the future. But again, we are working together with excellent consultants and you have excellent employees, but everyone has a different background. So you have to come up with a policy for employees, and then you have to train them, you have to inform them, and probably you have to, you know, you have to check that as well if they are following such rules. I think that's a highlight of the different policies I came up with, and of course, talk to them. I mean, you can't forbid them to travel to other countries if that will be allowed in the near future. But if that is from your point of view as a, you know, as a leader of a DSP, if that is important, ask your employees, okay, what have been your last destinations? Of course, I think in most of the country, you can't forbid them, oh no, you're not allowed to travel to Italy over the weekend if that is allowed by the country you're living and working in. But as an employer, you would probably like to know where your employees and your consultants and staff traveled in the last couple of weeks. And again, we are not talking about today, because that might be really seldom that someone travels around the world. But we talk about 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, and COVID-19 won't be gone. So it will be still there for the next month, years, whatever. So very, very specific regulations should be set up, and you have to get a brighter view of the things, and it's not enough to rely on the local regulation and the local or legal requirements. Go for best practice, I think, and then you're on the safe side.
Yeah, that's on so many levels. That's brilliant, Martina. Thank you so much, because again, it's just great to have a framework which is very clear, which enables you to go forward. And Gordon, that brings me to in the updated GDPR policy that you've just let me have, which is going online next week. You actually included privacy, employee privacy, for the first time. And this is an area which, Martina, you were just saying, there is going to be a necessity for higher levels of disclosure of your employees' private data. Do you see a conflict there, Gordon, for organizations?
It's quite interesting. The data protection authorities, such as the ICO in the UK, are already blogging about, we will be more flexible. We won't be going after businesses who've had to make changes due to the pandemic. We understand the practical pressures they face. And that's in the context, for example, of the need at times to share data. But it also is the broader thing of more people working from home means there are greater risks of data security leaks. So the fantastic systems that may have existed within an office are slightly less fantastic when there are lots of home linkages going on. So greater risk, but the data protection authorities will take that into account. So a little bit of flexibility there. You can also fall back on things like if it's a legal obligation on your business to disclose data, then that is never in breach of the GDPR. So I wouldn't be too concerned. I think the way that the authorities have implemented the GDPR at a practical level suggests that they're going to continue to be pragmatic, and really you'd have to be very reckless to come into conflict with the authorities. So I'm relatively relaxed about that just now.
And coming back to Andrew and Alistair, as leaders in the field, Andrew, do you see? I was talking to your colleague Dima in China, and he was saying, they have started to open up. Domestic moves are again happening in China, and he said, Martina, what are you saying about the regulations for his children going to school? They must wear a mask. So across a multi-site operation like yours, even though you'll have one policy probably in place, it's that knowledge, that keeping on top of the regional restrictions which are changing by the day. How is that affecting you?
I mean, we have a kind of an internal system protocol which is, providing daily updates in the different countries as things change, and that is fed back centrally, and our in-house counsel will also review that in terms of is there anything specific in there that means we then need to amend our operating procedure or process in that country. I mean, and the reality has been, as Alistair was saying, in the UK, and is no different to a lot of the other countries where there's kind of been activity, but it's not been very much or so much out in the field. But as things start to ease at different levels in different countries, even in different cities in the same country, Germany's a good example where it does seem there's different messaging coming from the different states. So what we've just tried to do is, set our HSSE bar as high as we can, and roll that system and process out across our network. And as Martina was saying, it's just making sure that we've got obviously folks who are working from home who will at some point be going back to the office, but that they're comfortable in how we do that. but probably more importantly, in the shorter term, our consultants. So they're the ones who would be out meeting potentially the customers, meeting agents, etc. And where we stand currently is we have, in essence, kind of three options that we're sharing with, the relocating individual or family in terms of how would they like us to work with them, and making sure that our consultant is also comfortable. So they have a choice, and if they feel I'm not going to be that comfortable sitting in a car, then there is another option, and it could be something as simple as there's 2 cars. But it's making sure that all the people who are a member of our wider team are comfortable. But coming back to the original point, that we're not putting anybody in a position where there could be a more risk than necessary, and does that then potentially cause any liability. So we've started in a place, doesn't mean that's where it will continue, because it will depend as information is coming back on a daily, weekly basis, and there may be some things that we do need to then amend.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key, isn't it? That it's all happening. So we've been saying this for the last 9 weeks, haven't we? Really, it's changing every day. Alistair, how are you getting on with your teams about planning for how they're going to work and what protocols you've had in place? Because I think you're quite far down that line now.
We are. I would say we're taking a very cautious approach, though. It's interesting how everything that Gordon and Martina have just said applies to our industry, because we're in absolutely no rush to go back to the office, because we feel like, other than the social aspect of being at work, we don't need to. It wasn't a big concern for us right at the beginning. We were all perfectly comfortable and capable of working anywhere, really. I think that phrase of working from home has almost become working from anywhere. You don't have to even be at home. You can be potentially still working when you're on holiday in the future. It can literally be anywhere when you have a laptop. So we're in no rush to go back to the office. And I think that's probably the case in a number of industries, but particularly ours, when we're looking at reducing cost, and do we need an office of the same size? Do we need an office at all? So that's not a priority for us right now. We're going to continue to work remotely for the foreseeable future. And then in terms of how we work, providing the destination services, again, a very cautious approach where we aren't going to be having consultants in the same car as assignees. Transportation is going to be separate. And in some instances, that's absolutely fine. In some areas of London, you can actually walk from one property to another, or the assignee potentially will be in a taxi separately. So we're looking at different options, and we'll limit the number of people going into a property at any one time. So it may just be the agent and the assignee. Potentially, again, as Andrew said, different ways of working. The consultant will either be there in person or look at the property at another time, or, as happens occasionally, our consultant and our account manager in the office will be liaising with the assignee on FaceTime. And so they'll be speaking to one another virtually as the home search takes place. So just limiting contact, really, both in our office and as we provide services as much as possible as things progress. And I think that leads to a really important point, to kind of use my EuRA platform to say on behalf of all DSPs that at the moment, providing home search services and orientation services are actually more complicated than ever, and more time consuming than ever. And I think some clients will think, well, if something's happening virtually, presumably that's going to mean that the fee will be reduced. And actually, I believe at the moment, we're more important and more valuable than we have been before, because we are ensuring that an assignee is safe and healthy and following the rules and regulations of that country. So, and because of that, the process takes longer, even to the point where one of the guys in our office said the last couple of weeks, the briefing calls they're having with assignees are taking longer because, well, firstly, people want to talk. They may have been on their own for a while and they quite just like to have a chat. Plus, there's so much to talk about at the moment and how things are going to be different. So the relocation process is more complicated right now. So I think for DSPs across the world, now's the time to be speaking to our clients and saying, you know, I'd say the last thing you want to be doing is looking at a lump sum option when people are able to move and saying, here's some money to look after yourself. You want to be working with a company that has all of the things we've just discussed at the forefront of their mind, to say that you have a duty of care now more than ever for your employees, and the best way to do that, to ensure that they are healthy and safe, is to work with a reputable DSP who takes a cautious approach. And I'm sorry, for one other point on that point as well. Sorry, it's just I guess the complication for all of us as a DSP is we work with agents, and agents have a varying degree of compliance and safety in the way they work. So we again want to be saying yes and being positive and helpful as much as possible. Sometimes those choices are taken out of our hands, and it's up to us to be pretty firm to say this is how we need to work. So yeah, to my earlier point, I think more than ever DSPs play a really important role in the health and safety of assignees, and more valuable than ever.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad you actually brought up about 3 points there that I was going to ask you about, because I mean, obviously what we're talking about here is DSPs really doing what they do best, which is making sure that the people who are being moved around the world are being moved around the world in the best and most supported way possible. And at this time, that is going to include a higher level of touch, a higher level of time. Martina, you're talking about having 2 cars. Alistair, you mentioned that too. You know, this increases costs. So, you know, those conversations, like you said, Alistair, are not easy to have. But like you say, if, you know, it throws the whole question of people doing this kind of thing by themselves into, you know, a very questionable environment. Thank you so much. What I would really like to do is come back together maybe at the end of July, when things will have tentatively started to move. We hope, you know, touch wood. Because at that point, we'll know a lot more about, you know, the practical implementations. And Alistair, I'm glad you brought up the thing about different levels of responsiveness to this, because, I mean, we saw this happen in the UK. The minute that the property market opened up, there was that rush to regain revenue within that sector without necessarily the levels of concern and care that we're talking about in our industry. So thank you for highlighting that. So yeah, let's come back together at the end of July, see where we are. In the meantime, Gordon, Martina, Andrew, Alistair, I can't thank you enough for your time. It really has been extremely valuable, and I hope everybody out there who's watching this, you know, finds something useful. And don't forget, the legal guide, the GDPR guide, and Martina's guide to working with COVID-19 are available on the website. You need to log in. If you can't remember your password, press the forgot password button. Thank you so much, guys. Take care, and we'll see you again in a couple of months.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.